Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. It's really starting to feel like spring where I'm from, and that means that it's time to recharge my garden sprite for the year. So I poke around at where I buried it last year and see that it's grown a little bit, which is nice. Unfortunately it looked like it had rooted quite deep, so I had to grab my shovel in order to dig it up. It took a bit of convincing, but I finally managed to free it from the earth. We've already had quite a lot of rain this year, which meant that it had grown a little bit since I last saw it. So first things first, before recharging it, I had to give it a little bit of a wash in the kitchen sink. And then I carefully carried it up to my studio in order to recharge it. As you can see, it's definitely a little bit worn and a little bit dirty from the bad vibes of last year, so it's time to refresh it and give it a new lease of life, ready for the year to come. So the first step is to use a medium grit sandpaper just to remove the top level of bad vibes, making sure that the surface is paint ready. And so after a year's worth of bad luck has been removed, it was time to give it a new paint job. I start by putting down an initial coat of white, making sure to cover up all of last year's bad fortune. It was getting quite fiddly, and I realised it would be much easier if I attach it to a painting handle so I didn't have to get my hands covered in white paint. Unfortunately, I didn't have anything lying around, so I had to go out and buy this purpose-built painting handle. I sprayed off the bottom of the garden sprite with some alcohol and then applied some hot glue in order to connect it to the painting handle, making sure to apply it to the most dignified area of the garden sprite. And thus, after the connection of this high-tech apparatus, it was time to continue my white base coat. Because of the importance of this customization project, it was vital that I didn't plan ahead and I just painted what came to me in the moment. So I started off by mixing this tan colour and applying a couple of base coats just to make sure that it was all solid and there was less paint strokes visible. It was really important to get this sprite back in the ground as quickly as possible, so I used a hairdryer in between coats in order to dry it quickly, ready for the next one. So after 3 layers of the tan colour, it was time to begin adding the counter shading. If you can remember the footage of when I dug it up, the last year's bad vibes had really whittled away at the protective coat of this poor garden sprite, leaving it without any pigment to camouflage it from predators. So to ensure a good and fruitful year to come, I needed to restore the camouflage to this sprite to keep it hidden for the coming year. So as you can see on the foil behind, I've mixed 3 main colours and I'm applying them whilst they're wet to make sure they can blend into each other. I use a fluffy Sprite brush to help blend in the edges and make sure it forms a nice even gradient. Of course, picked colours that will help it blend into the foliage where I will bury it. After another quick blast from the hairdryer, it was time to start adding in some brighter colours to the base. And so after that initial gradient was all finished, I could start applying the finer details. I picked a warm grey for the tip of the muzzle and for the hooves. It mustn't have been camouflaged enough last year, and so this year I want to make sure that no bad vibes find this sprite. I'm adding a little pink heart to the tip of its nose in order to symbolise love and compassion. And then I was able to add black circles to the eyes, as a blind sprite can't protect you as well from the bad vibes. After this, I smudged in the dapples and made sure that they blended in nicely. For some reason this part wasn't in focus, and I hope it wasn't a bad omen. I almost forgot to add nostrils, which would have been a big mistake. Due to the subterranean habit of these sprites, a good sense of smell is really important to help them navigate underground, as well as a bright flash of white on the face to help other sprites see them amongst the dirt. And after that I topped up the pink on this little heart, before going to add back in the hooves that I must have painted over. And then after that I began to add in some variegation to the mossy mane and tail, making sure to add a difference of tones in order to help with the camouflage. I added some pale grey to define the edges of the hooves, and then went back and forth to make sure they all looked nice and polished. And now the Sprite has a nice set of hooves to keep it moving underground in the coming year. Next I moved on to give the eyes some shine, starting with a white underglaze which I let fully dry before going any further. At this point I decided to extend the white stripe on its face. Before adding some fluffy hairs to the neck and belly, and this should help keep it warm in its underground adventures. Now that the white highlights in the eyes were dry, I could add in the slime green and then go back in with some black to define the pupils. After this, I gave the whole Sprite a couple of coats of matte varnish. And then when that was dry, I could finally break it off of the painting handle. I just had to spend a little bit of time removing the adhesive as it had stuck a little bit too well. But once I'd had it all removed, I touched up the area that needed to be painted. Then I could begin to add the finishing touches, starting with this gold horn. It's super important to make sure the horn is nice and sharp and has no rust in order for the Sprite to dig successfully. And of course I added some gold flecks to the eyes. And finished up by adding some gold to the dapples. With that done, it was time to add some UV resin to the eyeballs. And just like that, the Garden Sprite was finally recharged. It was time to return the Sprite to the soil where I found it, ready for another year of banishing bad vibes. It had to work especially hard last year, so let's all hope for an easier ride this time. And at last, to help it on its way, I covered it with soil, and there it will remain until I dig it up again next year. And of course I cleared this piece of rubbish out of the area too. Thanks everybody for watching this totally serious video. I wish all of you luck in recharging your garden sprites this year, and I'll see you in the next one.